Good afternoon, Internet. We are gathered again here at Behind the Curve to discuss a topic of some import to our Wii community. Matthews making a movie? Question mark. Exclamation mark?
Greetings, comrades.
And good afternoon. So, Matthew, rumor has it on the street that you are writing a micro-budget movie.
Yes. For those who don't know, that's about like a movie probably under $1 million to some extent, and hopefully over $1.
So what we're saying is there's not a lot of money involved, especially in movie terms. But well, to get started, as I'm going to be asking most of the questions today, I'm going to ask you to sum it up. So, what's the name of your movie? What's its, give me the dust jacket. Give me when you hit info on your FiOS, what does it say about your movie?
Okay, well, I wouldn't necessarily put this down as a pitch meeting, but what I wrote was that the working title, at least for first draft, is called Black Swans and Red Dragon Kings. So sounds pretty pretentious, huh?
The title is a bit toothsome.
Okay.
'Tis large. And containeth many syllables.
So I think this is a film that you need a little background on. It's set kind of in a little bit in the future. It's hard to say really what. There is mentioned like certain things that this is kind of again my intention for the whole thing. I haven't really written this down in the first draft, but it takes kind of place in the future, maybe near a presidential election in like the last part of it. So America is more divided than ever. So you have like the alt-right and Antifa, but like more so.
Okay.
And extremism, like centrism, isn't very popular under this timeline. People think, the apocalypse. I would say that people think the apocalypse is tomorrow, and there isn't a lot of agreement, and there's a lot of extreme attitudes running around. So, for this movie, there's people who do something called manipulation who work for let's just say the far left. And for those who don't know what manipulation is, its full name is called manipulation socialism, because the whole idea is to take money from rich people and give back to their workers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not run by a government; it's actually run by just a bunch of random civilians. In the case of the United States, at least in this movie, there are only a handful of civilians, and nobody knows who they are, except for the very tight-knit group of manipulators. So. You probably want to give an example of what a manipulation would look like.
That'd be helpful, because you have explained the idea of what manipulation socialism is to me, and I had a little bit of a hard time getting it. So I think that using an example might help a viewer understand what manipulation socialism is, what that is in your world, and why that's a bad thing.
Well, yeah, it's basically without their consent, but basically, for the most part, at least from what we know, kind of spoiling it, that it doesn't break the law, and it's not done without consent or the knowledge of the target, I guess you could say. So, for my first manipulation, there's a bipolar guy who's rich, who kind of lives alone in an apartment, it isn't explained why he lives in an apartment, but anyway, run with me.
I'm running.
So, in bipolar disorder, like, you have depression and manic, and you can have drugs that kind of level out that for you, so you can kind of live a functional life. So the first manipulator, I won't name for now, kind of gets him off of his medication, and he goes into manic, which is the first part of the manipulation. The other part of the manipulation is his mail's been intentionally switched with his neighbor. So what happens is that he goes up to he's in manic, the bipolar guy whose medication's been messed with, goes up to his neighbor. He finds his neighbor's mail. He goes up to his neighbor and he gets basically mad at him because he's super irritated and he hurts him. So what happens is now there's a case that needs to be solved. No, I mean not a case, like a court case and an injury. So two manipulators who work for the far left, who also are a lawyer and a doctor, who are two main characters, Ron Schneid and who's the lawyer, and Dr. John Wang, who's the doctor, they take care of that and they get money from that. And they take that money and they actually put it and they give it back to the rich bipolar guy's workers. That's manipulation socialism.
Okay, so so it's something that would be considered illegal if it were to be discovered.
Yeah, there's some gray morality going on.
Okay. Alright, so, and when you say the quote-unquote far left, can we narrow that down to, like, is there a group? Is there some sort of, is there, like, some sort of, like, you know, like, leftover Cold War Soviet conspiracy? Is it like that kind of far left? Or is it, like, you know, like, somebody who's, you know, very, are we talking, like, Elizabeth Warren far left? Like, we're talking, you know, are we going, like, Elizabeth Warren, or are we talking, like, Lenin?
Well, yeah, like, I think, well, there's kind of like again, you know, you have a lot of people running around in this future America, but, like, you do have, like, these people who are actual Marxists who, they believe, you know, the Soviet Union wasn't real Marxism, and, in particular, Ron Schneid, who invented, manipulation socialism, he's kind of he believes that, well, the way he kind of deals with certain things like socialism, he believes that since the government, according to Marx, can only work for the bourgeoisie and is basically a pawn of the bourgeoisie, that socialism has to be done without the government, and that includes with manipulative socialism, which is a non-government way of giving capital back to workers, as well as he founded a commune. There's a lot of communes in this timeline that basically that and Marxist theory that socialism is a prerequisite for communism, and basically if people can get together, maybe they'll start sharing, especially under his commune. So yeah, like, in the idea of the commune is also to be more self-sufficient, which is something that goes hand in hand with that. And the other thing is that the manipulation money also goes through occasionally funding the commune when it basically can't be self-sufficient.
All right. Okay, so why write about this topic? Like, how do I? So, like,
I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah. Why write about this sort of topic? Like, what was your inspiration to arrive at this topic?
Well,
and then how did you write about it?
Well, unlike most writers, I start with theme. I don't really start with character, which I think is a little bit my Achilles heel, which means that characters are a bit less of my forte, I think. Mm-hmm. But some of the starting themes was about the kind of the philosophy of causes and causality, the philosophy of randomness, and the philosophy of coincidences and what they mean, and maybe a philosophy of the intervention of God and how what that would look like, things like that, and the sovereignty of God. Even though I kind of leave it open to kind of getting ahead of myself of what certain things are, if they're God or something else. Kind of leave things open for the viewer because I think it just works better. But anyway, there's, like, if in the case of Marxism, there's something called historical materialism. That means that, at least in the modern sense, the modernist sense, that there's certain, that Marxism is, well, not Marxism, that capitalism, that basically the world's history is, it goes from feudalism to capitalism to socialism to communism. And that's not something automatic that can be done. It has to come through unions and workers uniting and creating what Trotsky called a permanent revolution that goes, you know, country to country, creating until it creates a massive socialist state. So the idea is just that man is basically in control of his own destiny, in a sense. So I have a quote here. It says, Christianity says God created the world. Buddhism attributes the myriad phenomena to spiritual forces. All these doctrines that think about movement apart from matter are fundamentally incompatible with dialectical materialism. And that was actually a quote from Mao Zedong.
Hmm.
So, but another quote I have here, which is attributed to Albert Einstein, but it actually was probably from a British author, Doris Lessing. Coincidences are God's way of remaining anonymous. So you actually, if there's a God basically, and he controls things, there's no guarantee that certain things will be a certain way, especially if those things are evil. And that's basically the whole gist of it.
Okay. That's interesting because if you do read the script, you do see there is the playing of odds, and the things which deviate from the odds are how the story is told.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's too much of a spoiler. That which deviates from the predictable is how the story advances. So, your writing process. What kind of writing process did you go through for this? Like how did you write about this? Like, how did you research it? How did you write about it?
I was a bit haphazard, especially since I was in school, and I still don't have a lot of self-control now.
Yeah.
So compared to you, which, like, you're almost on the cusp of publishing with Blood Covenant.
Fingers crossed, everybody. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. But for me, yeah, it kind of... I still haven't actually gone to the text that I wish I researched, and I know I'm not stopping to not write until I read those texts, but I started reading a lot of texts just throughout instead of, like, picking and choosing, which I feel maybe I shouldn't have done. But I read a book, for example, Black Swans by Nassim Taleb, that kind of talked about this stuff. And I've also, for writing, I've just gone in my free time and written very little, which I think why the first draft, for example, is kind of like fragmented and doesn't feel like a concise whole. So, but now my writing process has improved, that I'm getting, probably because I wrote so much, that I'm going through more and more text. I've also done everything without an editor, so a lot of my ideas, I think I should warn everyone, that I've shared with both on my YouTube channel on here, is basically it's subject to change, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, that's how things have been going.
Okay. All right. So that's gonna move us on from sort of the sum it up portion to the characters and setting. So I'm going to start with the setting. Now, if I remember correctly, the setting is in Albany, New York.
Yes, which is the state capital of New York.
Uh-huh. And we don't get a whole lot of outside shots. Almost all the shots are inside.
Yeah.
It's a very inside movie. So just talk about sort of like the setting, like the aesthetics you're going for, the ideas you were going through, or setting it in Albany, just sort of like your idea of where the characters are.
Yeah, you probably couldn't tell it's from Albany because, yeah, it's a very inside film. The reason why that is because, and I did try to, like, get these interconnected, that it's with a low budget film, like, you want, especially if it's your first film, you want the least amount of surprises at all. So if you read the film, like, there's not a lot of above 3 people or 4 people. Like, I think there's one scene that has 4 people max in it. And yeah, it's almost entirely inside because the in-source explanation is that it's because it's secretive and that works, but also because it's easier to shoot inside. You don't have to wait on weather conditions.
Right.
With few exceptions inside. So that would work cheapest and that would work fastest and that would work best for basically an amateur like me.
Yeah.
But as for the location, why I picked Albany, New York, honestly, it started out not as the best thing because it's actually where J.G. Healy lives, and also where a great film called First Reformed is set, which is kind of a leftist movie, which kind of made sense to me. But then as it went on, it kind of was more because it was sort of a town that was outside of a big city area that would be harder to manipulate, where there's more butterfly effects like New York City. But so within like the northeast liberal leftist hegemon that we know as the Boss Wash metro area, I mean,
that was a lot of words.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is you wanted a city that was in sort of that was a sort of a mainline city.
Yeah. That had probably a good amount of progressive politics, but wasn't big enough that, like, if you were doing a manipulation in, like, say, New York, there would just be so many variables and butterfly effects that you couldn't get anything done.
Okay, so you want a city where it may not be necessarily strange to have people with, sort of more Marxist ideas or living off by themselves.
Yeah.
But would still be populous enough to have a decent sized population.
Yeah, and you also have,
Okay.
in my backstory, my third reason is that Ron Schneed he's not from New York, he's from actually Atlanta, Georgia, and he came up to
Right.
to Albany to actually influence New York State politics for Marxism. And I don't know when I'm really doing that with that necessarily, but apparently he kind of shied away from that, and he started, I think, well, he may or may not have started the commune, and he definitely invented manipulation socialism.
Okay. Alright, so that'll bring us into the characters. So we have, we don't need to spend super long on the characters, because there's not many of them. I think there's only 4 named characters in the entire thing. There's John, Ron, Ravi, and Susan, who's John's sister.
Yeah. So let me start with Ron, because he's kind of the catalyst, more or less, of the story. So he grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm thinking he's maybe more like a Generation X kind of leftist. So he grew up in a fairly left-leaning Jewish family in Atlanta. So, and he got involved with kind of in his college. He was kind of bullied, so he kind of understood, and he kind of hung out with like the minorities of Atlanta, especially like a little bit post civil rights. So he kind of like was involved in that. And when he went to college, he got involved with what we call now critical theory, but in the 1980s it wasn't really called that. And some of the writings of Derrida, Foucault, who again were kind of new at the time, or at least died around that and became that time. And coupled with that, the end of the Soviet Union, so which really, you understand me, right? That this all like contributed to his character.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can see that there's sort of a... You're trying to create a character who's very much shaped by his time.
Yeah. And between coming to Albany and his graduation from law school, he basically was what we'd call now a social justice lawyer. So that would be like taking a transgender person outside of their family to get hormone medication, or having a police brutality case. So it's very concerned with social justice. I don't have a catalyst of why he stopped that, essentially, except that maybe his critical theory background kind of encouraged him to go to the source of things, which he saw as wealth in America and the 1% who are unable to give up their wealth, and created kind of a system of government that only gets in like their elite, who they paid for, essentially. But the system, it's a pay-to-win system. It's that America is controlled by profit, so maybe he became a Marxist at this point. So that's the whole idea of it. Does that make sense?
To some extent, I think so. So Ron is sort of the main charisma behind the whole project of manipulation.
Yeah, he has his he doesn't really seek out power at all, but he gets more and more popular, and he like kind of takes on certain roles.
He embraces the power as it comes to him.
Yeah. He's not anti-hierarchy, but he very much seeks to deconstruct systems.
So, John and Ravi were both students of Ron's who rebel against him.
Yeah, I'm thinking of writing Ravi and John as maybe being friends. So, like, they kind of grew up in, like, North Jersey, sort of like the kind of like the Asian ethnic sections. Like, there's a lot of Indians in North Jersey. I don't know about Chinese. So yeah, I haven't explained that. Ravi is Indian American and Ron is Chinese American. Ravi might have actually been born in India. I'm not quite sure. John is actually the son of two Chinese parents. I don't know if they're mainland yet, but they got involved in religion, and John really didn't,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of created a big gap between them. But kept on. The one thing he did, became basically less rebellious as he grew up.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned him having a Maoist phase, and now he's more of a libertarian socialist.
Okay.
And he kind of he became a doctor and basically is a very hardworking person. I'm thinking maybe Writing has more of a stoic professional, but I'm not quite sure.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe his weakness is that he overextends himself, or that he's not fully done with his rebellion and doesn't know what to do with it.
Mm.
But his main role is that he's the apprentice manipulator to Ron, who, yeah, keeps him being. And when we get to him in the beginning of the movie, he's basically proving himself with more and more complicated manipulations. As for Robbie, I don't know quite if he's a manipulator yet. He kind of takes care of like maybe hacking for the commune or some kind of like coding role, and he's a little bit rebellious too, but in a way that kind of less maybe than John is.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really written him well yet, but he's I'm thinking maybe he's part of the cleaner crew for manipulations that kind of gets rid of traces of the existence of a manipulation. So
Okay, so why did you choose this cast?
so Ron is very into diversity, so he doesn't tend to hire a lot of people who are just white in his friendship. So there's also going to be two characters that are hearing of. One is an African American who works in the New York Soviet, which is basically a collection of unions in New York City that
Mm-hmm.
fight for Marxism, and he has a working surname of, I think, Jenkins, I think. So he's example of that. And there's another person who's kind of hinted at but never shown, or at least for now. His name is Tron, and he's a Vietnamese American engineer who actually was possibly involved with the Vietnamese Communist Party. So the reason why you're seeing a lot of non-white people is intentional. That
Mm-hmm.
Ron believes heavily into critical race theory, that he's giving basically American minorities a voice in his commune that wouldn't happen organically in a capitalist system. So if anyone's wondering why this is there, that's basically why.
Okay, and Susan has about 2 scenes in the movie.
Yeah,
She.
so that's John's sister,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not quite sure what to do with her exactly yet. I'm kind of wishing I gave them both biblical names to kind of give them more of a hint of their past.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so like for now, I kind of have her be the recipient of info dumps to kind of explain things that can't be explained very well through action. And as well as possibly like an update of like knowledge of the family situation and how it's kind of improved, and how John has gone over some of his old things, his old prejudices. So other than that, yeah, there really isn't much of a use for her, but I'm still figuring her out.
Okay, is it intentionally ironic that in a group that is so looking for diversity, they have a lot of racial diversity but virtually no gender diversity?
Yeah, I could start to work on that. Like that is a good point.
Uh-huh.
Another thing is that like Ron is technically white, even though he is Jewish, and he's kind of involved with all this. But I don't know what to quite to do with that either. But yeah, that's a good point.
Do you think that's a dangerous topic to wade into in a first movie, a first micro budget movie?
Yeah, but I think the whole thing is in general. I mean, if you think about it.
So would you say it's more of a? You say it's more sort of a cautionary tale of where modern liberalism would take the world?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a thing of extremism, because they kind of mentioned that the alt right exists and kind of has its own like conglomeration, like maybe in the Midwest. I'm thinking,
So
but
so 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 there's an opposing force to this, to Ron's sort of left wing manipulations. There's also some sort of right wing manipulation out there.
yeah, there's far right. I'm thinking like
Interesting.
maybe like alt right. maybe, or like
Mm.
KKK groups, but they're not as prominent as they are, and they're weaker. Like one subplot might be that like since John only wants him to focus on manipulating the rich for
Mm-hmm.
socialism purposes, and maybe like one conflict is like he manipulates I don't know, some like alt-right leader, and he's like, why did we do that? I thought we promised we were only doing this for socialism.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely like a theme going around about like the use of power, ironically, the ironic use of power, that how he's creating just a different hierarchy and possibly a worse hierarchy, because it's kind of hinted at like at the end with John, like, you know, if manipulation fell in the hands of corporations, like what could they not do to us, basically.
Mm. Oh, see, those are questions that I think would be really interesting. Even having rival extreme political groups with manipulation, that would actually.
But I don't think they have manipulation, which is what.
Okay, but they would also have this sort of commune
which is one of the
structure.
reasons why they're weaker too, and they're not. Other than the fact they're not as popular.
Okay, so there's sort of this. So there's this sort of this splinter branch of I would probably say academic liberalism. So this hardcore splinter branch, because these are educated people, many of whom would come from a background that would be
Oh, you have two STEM workers and a lawyer, so they're definitely intellectuals.
Right, there'd be intellectual people who have had to overcome some sort of hardship, whether it be economic or racial or sectarian, in the United States, and they become part of a sort of a fracture group.
Yeah, I would think that.
And that has taken power, like, has become the most prominent fracture group because of this special ability of manipulation.
Yeah, but also I think that John's character, that you kind of have, he's an immigrant and he's also not white, but that maybe the reason why he mellows out and becomes less extremist. And I think that's another thing that my film might explore. Okay. This path to extremism that he's not white,
mm-hmm.
but he's rich and he's a doctor, he's a STEM worker, and he lives in a nice city in the Northeast. So he even maybe. I think that maybe he could use a term like Asian privilege, like in an unironic sense, that he goes from seeing himself as a victim from being someone who is legitimately privileged, along with Robbie. So, but whereas John, Ron, who's kind of he's very into critical race theory and his history as a Jewish man, that he kind of sees himself as more of having a longer history of oppression that still hasn't gone away, that's maybe more comparable to African Americans in this country, or what he thinks, which is just his opinion. So
interesting. So how would you square these people who are doing illegal things, successful people doing illegal or malicious things to make up for perceived by, like, how would you square that with people who have been legitimately oppressed or held back? Like, because these to me seem like people who have been successful. These are people who have been successful.
What's their incentive now that they're successful?
Well, like what I'm saying is these are people who would be of racial minorities or ethnic minorities, or people who have come to the United States but have been extremely successful thanks to the system that they are in. So, are people who have been legitimately wronged, like, not part of this society? Like, is there any address of people who have been legitimately wronged and oppressed? I mean, because they're the history of the oppression of Judaism in Europe in the past, or Asian immigrants in Canada, or African Americans in the United States. Is there any sort of address of those of legitimate oppressions and these people who do not seem to be subject to oppression, or if they are, have been very successful because of it and then have moved on?
I think you're saying that what's their incentive now that some of them are successful. Well, in the case of John's case, I think how he thinks is that like privilege is still a thing, but it's white plus Asian privilege, whereas he just thought it was just white privilege. And he thinks that a lot of his success, that capitalism creates more problems than just income inequality. It also creates things what Marx would term commodity fetishization, which he sees in like maybe it could be mentioned that John doesn't have a social media account. Like he's very invested in the idea of as a commune, as a community. That because that they're trying to work on a social society in the commune, that it means people are more together and they don't have to worry about consumerism as much, especially when you're out working in a community garden and talking with people with like no cell phone. Does that make any sense? Like,
it makes sense. It's not what I was asking, but it makes sense. Just because time is moving on, we can always come back to that question if we have time.
One thing I didn't really talk about is the whole draw of the movie, that is this black swan. What is a black swan?
Right, there we go. That is a legitimate answer. I mean, because legitimate. What I'm saying, it's a legitimate topic because everything else should be pretty short. So, go for it. So that is one thing that I think is very important that people know is what is a black swan going in, because I will point out that the characters in this use technical jargon with no explanation, which leads us right to dialogue style. This is dialogue style that I think you so it was inspired by Shane Carruth's micro-budget time travel movie Primer.
Yeah, I'm a real big fan of Shane Carruth, and what I think, like without going into a tirade about what I like about Primer, is that like it takes real science, still a bit of the side speculative, and makes them real. Like it's going for like full throttle realism here, including with the kind of people who might invent it, and so. Also this way that I think you get to explore like the soul of the leftist in all this, or how leftists think, that you're making it as real as possible, that like this could be tomorrow's America of division, and it is a bit of a cautionary tale in that way, but yeah, it makes things real. If that makes any sense, like you're overhearing a conversation is the idea.
Okay, and do you worry about the political message being too heavy-handed?
I guess so, but I'm trying to make them write it in a almost bipartisan way, in the sense that like nobody's really the bad guy, but I will necessarily show consequences, if that makes sense.
I mean, this is obviously a political viewpoint that you are opposed to.
I would say, yeah, it's safe to say yes, but I would just say that, like, I'm showing this basing in a loving way, if that makes any sense. I empathize with these people, and I understand their good intentions, but I'm just saying that the system kind of, like, even when you try it in different ways, that's why I'm trying to get the jargon down, I'm trying to get the theory down.
Okay.
And I know that there's a difference between, say, a Bolshevikian and a Menshevikian, or a Leninist, a Stalinist, a Trotskyist, a Maoist, a Titoist, that kind of thing.
Okay. And in your eyes, by the end of the movie, is Ron the villain or is Ron not the villain? Because I've read the script, and my impression was that Ron was the villain.
Well, yeah, but I don't say it in heavy-handed terms. Like, even if he is basically, Emperor Palpatine, I don't say it. Okay. And I wouldn't say so much is that he is wrong or he does wrong things. Is that the thing he follows leads to things that are bad. He chose to have an unhealthy way of doing things, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And the point more is that he's wrong, he's incorrect, than he's wrong morally. Mm-hmm. Which, do you mind if I go into explain what the Black Swan event is?
Please do.
So I explained earlier that that historical materialism kind of assumes a physical universe where there's no intervention of God, and there is no, Buddhist spiritual forces of karma that arranges a world in a system of justice. The justice, especially economic justice in the case of Marxism, is man's domain. It's for us to do, because there's no God to judge us in an eternity. There's no heaven above us. There's no hell below us. Yeah. Imagine if we had no money. Imagine if we had no countries.
Sounds like hell.
I know. But one of the things that socialism manipulation socialism is that it's a form of socialism. Mm-hmm. But as the form, but that assumes that everything goes according to plan. And of course, there's counter manipulations. There's things going wrong because there were just unknown unknowns, and the good statisticians behind the communes just didn't know what they were doing. But there's also a point of something that they really don't know what they're doing, and in this is discussed in the movie. There's something called Black Swan theory, which is basically something that's unexpected in like a statistical model or a chain of events that is basically like impossible to see, but like when you look back on it and you trace back its causes, you can see it clearly as something that they should have seen all along, basically. So in this case, a black swan event is also a butterfly effect. So what happens is that in one manipulation, it keeps on going wrong in the same way for John, and he's basically more and more freaked out, and he kind of goes back. He kind of doesn't mess with it, and at first it's just assumed that it's something that is, it's basically just a fluke, and just like I guess it's intelligence. Don't worry about it. Maybe it's another counter manipulation we don't understand yet. But the second time it happens is with John's personal life, is that he gets a malpractice with a man whose surname is Danielewski, which is a real name. It's a Polish name, but he was a person with the same last name. So John goes and speaks with medical examiners, like, what kind of leads do you have? And they said they have a lead with like a post office. And then John goes ahead is like, maybe I can go look this up for you. Like, if you take the day off, like, I'll go, because I'm suing this guy. He knows this guy. And then he figures out that when he traces back all the causes, it ultimately goes to a box that got tipped over almost by an invisible hand, like from like a poltergeist from a horror movie. And that similar things start happening that start to mess up manipulation socialism. And it's not told, again, like, this is kind of like, have you ever watched Inception?
Yes.
So you remember the spinning top scene?
Yeah. It's
like basically an ending that's made to be ambiguous. We never find out what the Black Swan event, who's behind it, or what's behind it. It's like Inception spinning top. You don't know if it's another manipulator. You don't know if it's the government. You don't know if it's God. You don't know if it's aliens. You don't know if it's ghosts. You just know that it makes manipulation social. Basically, this being that can create the Black Swan events ultimately calls the shots and has a lot of knowledge behind really whatever's going on, and apparently is against Ron and John to some extent for whatever reason, almost like it's protecting the very things that John and Ron deconstruct. Like
them in their surf shop.
Like they both claim to love the environment and to fight capitalism in the name of the environment, but they're also deconstructing their environments. And they also, like, one theory that Robbie actually comes back because he's a Jainist, is that maybe this is nature's way of healing itself.
That was his theory. That was his theory in the library, right?
Yes, and this is kind of like this almost sort of... That's another thing about my film. It's supposed to be postmodernist, or maybe even neo-romantic, because it's the way of nature being constructed and being protected by some other force, if that makes any sense.
I mean, it does. So, to just move on past that, just for a final question.
All right.
What is your ultimate vision for this project? Like, what is your crowning vision for this project?
Maybe make it like a little bit under an hour and 30. You mean like technical stuff?
Yeah, not just technical stuff, but just give me like 2 minutes. Where do you want this movie to go?
Well, ultimately it's about themes. So for me, it's about, with the plot in mind, to explore themes of nature, coincidence, and randomness, free will and determinism, the viability of Marxism and historical materialism in light of the butterfly effect and the limits of predicting the future, and possibly explore how people get radicalized, how totalitarianism develops, and the effects of language control. So, again, like, I use a lot of my...
That's some light dinner. That's some light after dinner reading.
Like I said, two of my biggest influences are Terry Gilliam and Shane Carruth, and I think I'm going for more Shane Carruth because he's kind of low budget and he kind of creates a path for pretty deep thinking films.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could kind of create a little, Shane Carruth homage with something of myself that truly is, because I don't want to use my last name, Matthewian, you know,
Matthewian.
you know, I
So
could go
you want to
fulfill
develop
my
your own
dream.
school of thought.
Yes, fulfill
Okay.
my dream of creating, a piece of fiction for all these years, really.
Okay, that's cool. All right,
Does it make
so
sense to you? Are you excited? Do you? That's what I want to know.
my movie, but not my movie.
My movie? No, you're
Your
making a
movie.
movie?
No, I'm not. Okay, so am I excited? Do I get it? Um.
And what's your favorite aspect of it?
Okay, so do I get it? Not entirely, but I'm getting there. Am I excited? Yes.
Okay.
3. What do I think of it? Was that the question?
Yeah.
Um. It needs.
I remember you saying earlier it was pretentious, but that was back in like the pre-first draft
Pre
days.
first draft, I did tell you the topic was pretentious. I still think the topic is pretentious, but I think it has good potential. It's a good idea. It is a good idea. The ideas are good. The theory ideas are Black Swan, and the topics you're trying to address are, I think they're interesting and they're very much of the time. The story needs a little direction so far. I think that's the big thing. I'd say the story needs a little bit of direction, but it is interesting. I am glad you mentioned the radicalization things. That actually makes more sense. That makes more sense of the characters that makes more sense of the characters being so here's the interesting thing. So the characters that we see on screen are this is going to be to the earlier question I was just trying to answer. Just the one that I wasn't sure we got across was saying that, like, so do you address the idea sort of because these are characters who are supposed to fight oppression but may not necessarily be oppressed themselves.
Yes, they go on the behalf of their collective is the idea.
Okay, so that's the idea behind them.
Yeah, if they're not specifically oppressed, someone of the race is.
Okay, and they're trying to turn that into sort of a larger idea for the manipulation socialism ideal.
It is for the workers, but Ron would say that because a lot of workers are minorities, it kind of fits together pretty well.
Okay. All right. I want to make sure I'm trying to get this, and by this you're not trying to discount actually oppressed peoples versus these very successful people.
I'm not saying they're not oppressed. I'm just saying this is not how you do it.
Okay. Cool. All right. Got it.
So do you have a single favorite aspect?
A single favorite aspect, I think, is the idea of the manipulation itself. It's very interesting.
Yes.
I like the
think
idea.
It's pretty original too.
It is. I you don't necessarily see that kind of thing floating around out there. It's not like mind control or anything. It's
it can happen, can it?
It's you're building circumstances. That's what you do. You're building circumstances. You're playing Dungeon Master for the real world. Your characters have freedom, but they don't have that much freedom, do they?
They have creaturely free will.
Yeah.
Do you like the postmodern aspect?
I like that something is looking beyond the postmodern theories, like more tapped out theories.
Yeah.
Like that are still being taught in colleges. Okay, so I believe you have some questions for me, sir.
Oh yes. Number one, what do you think will be the epoch that will end postmodernism?
Oh, good grief. The epoch, as in, what is the movement that's going to end postmodernism?
Well, when I think of modernism, the epoch that started it was the French Revolution, and the epoch that ended it was the Berlin Wall. It all culminated in a single event, even if things led up to it and came out of it. We could point to it on a map, you could say, even if that is simplified.
This may seem weird, but an eventual shift from a individualistic society to a collectivist society.
A balance of both, or more just collectivists in general?
No, I'm thinking that we live in a very individualistic society, probably a toxically individualistic society.
Hyper-individualism.
And I think that's the way that the Western world is. But I think eventually we tend to see, I think historically we see swings back and forth between individualistic societies and collectivistic societies. And I know there's also different, certain, it's generally that, Eastern society tends to favor collectivism, whereas Western society tends to favor individualism. I think any sort of, shift in that balance, or the fact that individualism just becomes so toxic that it needs to swing back the other direction, I think that would definitely sort of move away from postmodernism, and we would go back to having grand overarching ideas. We'd go back to having meta-narratives. Because we're seeing now the cost of not having meta-narratives, even if meta-narratives were flawed, so that people are trying to create new ones. And so much so that the people who tore down meta-narratives are now trying to create their own meta-narratives. So we're bound to swing back the other way.
My only question would be for like what to do with the internet, but that's kind of a different question.
I don't know.
I think that kind of has fueled hyper-individualism.
It has fueled it, but it's also created a new sense of community, and weirdly enough, tribalism. Tribalism is a step back from individualism. Or is it the absolute end working of toxic individualism?
It's just weird. I should talk about that maybe in my movie. I don't know.
Tribalism is very, very interesting. Of course, somebody's gonna be like, "Oh, you can't use that phrase because you're offending people who live in tribe." That's not what it means.
Well, you're dealing with both literal and figurative.
Sorry, I'm being. Okay, so Matt,
deal with figurative and literal tribalism in your book, I think.
That's not wrong. Definitely
the
literal.
Tribe Lance comes to mind.
Yes. Okay, so. Micro-budget movies require a lot of skills that you possess or are working on.
Yes.
It seems like a naturally good fit, but how did you discover micro-budget movies?
I kind of started with El Mariachi by Robert Rodriguez, and I think I also kind of watched a movie called Breathless by Truffaut.
Mm-hmm.
Not Truffaut. Godard. In 1960, and then I went on to what's this way? Yeah, then I went to Shankaroo. So that's kind of how I discovered it. So it was one after another, thanks to the Messiah College library, actually.
Interesting. Okay. Back to you, sir.
Number 2. When do you think the time is right in a writer's career to create a children's story?
Ooh. So the market for children's stories has not been great lately, so probably once you're established as of now, I think there's never a bad time to make children's books, because children need good books. Save picture books. Everybody out there, I know schools and certain educators are trying to get rid of picture books.
Because this doesn't really, there's not a lot of literacy in that.
No, because they think that chapter books are more challenging for children. Whereas picture books have been shown to have better long-term benefits for children.
Oh, okay.
So I read a lot of picture books when I was a kid, and I ended up being an English major. And a lot of people I know at college read a lot of picture books, and enjoyed them more than chapter books, who also ended up going on to be English majors. So I would very much be in favor of saving picture books. I mean, they are more expensive to make than chapter books. But there's a very special art to making picture books, and they are very important to children, and we should totally save picture books. So, but now, judging by the market, probably once you're established is when you should write a children's book. Young adult is the most cutthroat literary market.
Really?
Oh yeah.
I guess because of Harry Potter and all that, it's like if you can make $1 billion like J.K. Rowling.
If you can't make $1 billion, then just get out. Get out. It's not worth it. It's not worth it to the publishing company. They're not interested in young adult stuff.
They also get all the movie deals.
Get all the movie deals, and you don't even have to make up a new main character.
Sorry. How could something be so easy yet hard to write at the same time?
Precisely. All right, and my final question is, why do you think we chose fantasy for the main topic of our podcast?
I don't know. I mean, like, I guess it's a kind of question of personality, like
Yeah.
why personalities are attracted to it.
Yeah, that's an existential question that I never asked myself until this morning.
Yeah, maybe because we're homeschoolers. Do you ever think of that? I don't know.
Woo! I don't know.
I don't think anyone knows that. Yeah, so.
Oh, well, there we go.
Maybe because we were like, I hate to say, maybe not socialized, but like maybe more isolated in a way. We had more free time. I had a lot of free time growing up.
I had, we both had a lot of free time growing up, when I think of it.
I mean, I started reading, like, Lord of the Rings after seeing the movies in 2011. They were just sitting on my family's, VHS thing for a while. And then I read my dad's copy of Gormenghast, which I just grown, and that kind of really started it, honestly.
I hear that.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I think for me I was just always fascinated. I tended to be an escapist as a child because I was a pretty, like, I've never been a great, like, people person.
Okay.
So I like to be an escapist as a child, which is, I was very happy to be homeschooled because it meant I didn't have to, like, I only had to deal with the human beings who I already knew I liked on a regular basis, so you know what, it was okay.
I guess so.
Like, I had to deal with like you, Rob, a few people occasionally, and my parents. And you know what, I'm chill with all those people. So
I guess so. Yeah, I can see that.
yeah.
I can understand that too, but I'm trying to find new friends in my college, but that's another story.
Yes, you are a braver man than I when it comes to making friends. Alright, so here we are, kids. We're going to sign off for the day. I hope your brains are not broken by our conversation about things that I barely understand. Heck, I don't understand. It involves math. I don't know. I took consumer math twice.
Oh, okay.
That tells you all you need to know about my math ability. So I can do a household budget, but if somebody says the word calculus, I just stare at them and go, "Oh, you're one of those people." All right. Have a great night. Toodaloo, internet. You beautiful, beautiful, weird individualists. Internetism. All right. Bye now. Come back now. Y'all here?